Blue and white basically represent the Aegean. I don't know how many islands are in the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean that belong to Greece, but there's many, many of them. As a matter of fact, somebody has said 365. I don't know if that just becomes a convenient number, but it's about that. And so the blue and white represents the Mediterranean and the Aegean. The cross up in the upper left, the Greece has been fought over and switched from country to country. Different countries have conquered it constantly. It was one of the first land settled. They have history that goes back to thousands and thousands of years. And for thousands and thousands of years, they were conquered by some nation and so forth. And it didn't really stabilize until 1820. In 1820, they had Grecian wars, and at that time, the people that they were fighting against were the Ottoman Turks. So the Ottoman was the empire, and Turks now obviously would be Turkey, but it wasn't Turkey back then. And so they finally got their freedom from the Ottoman Turks in 1820. And the story that was told by one of our guides said that the people that came to help them were primarily Christians. Greece, there are three types of denominations, roughly speaking, and I'm speaking in generalities. You have Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox. So basically, you know who the Catholics are. Protestants are just about anybody who isn't Orthodox or Catholic. And then your Orthodox are basically kind of one type of religion, but there are different types within that. So you have Russian Orthodox, you have Greek Orthodox, you have Romanian Orthodox, and they're pretty much all the same. They have different flavors depending on which country they come from. But obviously in this area, it's Greek Orthodox. And so the other Orthodox nations, which were Christians, really came to their aid in 1820 and helped fight against the Ottoman Turks. So Greece became a country in 1832, although they won their freedom from the Ottoman Turks in 1820. And Greece was so happy that most of their aid came from Christians and Christian countries that's why they wanted to honor the cross. They wanted to honor other Christian religions. So that's why they put the cross up in the upper left, and the blue and white has to do with the Mediterranean and mostly the Aegean Sea. So that's the cross. Now here you're going to see this is primarily what we went on was Paul's second missionary journey. Mostly was what the journey that we were on, and there was some in John because we went to Patmos, but most of it was Paul. So this is Greece over here. This is what they're calling Galatia. What at the Bible times this was known as Galatia in general. This over here. This over here is Turkey, present-day Turkey, Constantinople being right up here. And so Paul started from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is just a tad below here. This says Caesarea, which we've been to, but that's actually in Israel. I didn't put pictures of those in here. So Paul started his second missionary journey in Jerusalem, and he went up to Antioch. The thing about Antioch was that's where they were first called Christians, and by the way, at the beginning that was a derogatory name. They were made fun of by being called Christians. Christian means little Christ, and so he was at Antioch. This is Tarsus, where he was actually from, okay? This is where Paul was from. So he went up here, Derbe, and then Lystra, Iconium. Over here you would see some of the 7 churches of Revelation. There's Colossae, you know, the book of Colossians, and Ephesus, Sardis. These churches were within the 7 churches, but this map doesn't have anything to do with the 7 churches, so they're not all named. But basically, he went from there, Iconium and Antioch, and then he went over here to Troas. Does anybody know what the more famous name of Troas. We don't recognize really Troas, but if you knew the other name, if you knew anything about history, you'd recognize it. Do you know what it is? Begins with a TR. Famous for a horse. Trojan horse, okay, or Troy. So this Troas is actually Troy, of which the Trojan horse comes and all that. But anyway, so he started in Troas, and then he left Troas, and then he went over here. And we're going to pick up the story in Acts chapter 16, verses 6 and 7, as he's leaving, and I'll point some of these things out. Notice this is Mysia. This part right here is Asia. This part over here, if you obviously kept going that way, you'd get to India and China and so forth and so on. So this way is all Asia. This, starting in Greece and going that way, is all Europe. And so you may have heard the term Eastern and Western. If you ever do that, if you ever consider that, Eastern religion or Eastern is all based on right here. Constantinople and this Aegean Sea up to the Black Sea. Okay, this is all East. That is all West. So when they say we have Western values, that would be like European values. That would be Spain and France and England and everything west of this break right here. This is Eastern. So this is Asia. That is Europe. So we pick up the scripture in Acts chapter... Okay, and these little boxes are places that we went to. I'll get to them one by one. So verses 16, Acts 16, 6 and 7. Paul and his companions, who happens to be Silas and Timothy at this point, Silas and Timothy. Paul at this time it's just Silas and Timothy. So reading in Acts 16, verse 6. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, that's right there, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. So this is Asia. So they were traveling, they're on the second missionary journey, and they wanted to preach in Asia. And the Holy Spirit said, no, I don't want you going in there. Verse 7, when they came to the border of Mysia, this is over here, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, which is up here, Bithynia. So they tried to go this way. They tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. And then so it would not allow them to go to Turkey, what's present-day Turkey. And then in verse 8, it says, so they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. So this is Troas right there, or what we know today as Troy. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia. Notice up in that left corner is Macedonia. The whole northern part of Greece is called Macedonia, the southern Macedonia and northern Macedonia. But at this time, he tried to go over to Macedonia. He had a vision. So Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us out. So he had a vision of Macedonia asking him to come over there. In verse 10, after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia. And who wrote the book of Acts? Paul. Okay, no, Paul did not write the book of Acts. Luke wrote the book of Acts. So now notice that it says Paul and his companions did blah, 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 and he told the story. But now we get to verse 10, and it says, after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready. So now Luke has joined them. So in the beginning of the book of Acts, it's Luke writing the story in the second person. They did this, or I don't know if that's the third person. They did this and they did that. But now he's saying, we did this. So is that the second person? We? We is first, okay. Yeah, so Luke is now with them. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So the thing that I notice in that verse is that it says they left at once, and it's now we. So Luke is now joining Paul, Silas, and Timothy. And the first place that they went, okay, watch, because this is how it's going to go. Watch the screen. Ready? Here we go. There it is. So this box right there, so that's where it says that we're going. So after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and the next day to Neapolis. So that box up there is encircling Neapolis. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and a leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. So I don't have, so there's Philippi right there. I don't have a picture of Neapolis. Today's name of Neapolis is Kavala. And I didn't get a picture of that. Somebody on the bus might have, but the bus was not allowed to stop there. It was just the road went by where he would have landed. We actually saw the bus slowed down, and she said, if you look out there, you can still see some pilings. Okay, you guys know what pilings are? It's the timbers that come up out of the water that would have had a dock built onto it, and now all that's left is pilings. And there were still some pilings, and they say if you scuba dive, you can see a lot more of the footings and the pilings, and that was back from Paul's day. But now, over the course of years, that port has moved, and so they don't use that particular place. There was a nice beach there, you can go swimming, but there was no place for the bus to pull over, even though I thought there's plenty of places. But for whatever, they didn't pull off, so we weren't able to get pictures. Some people took pictures of that, but we didn't really stop to see anything there. And so then he goes on to Philippi. And now the difference from that first box to the second box is about 10 miles. So all he did is land in Neapolis, and then they went over to Philippi, about 10 miles. And so here is, now the way they wrote back then, they just run all the letters together. But you can see that this says Philippi. Okay, so this is an ancient stone where they used to carve things in stone. And I don't know what else it said after this or down here, but I just took a picture that it pointed out that we're in Philippi. This is the Via Ignatia. This right here is the Via Ignatia. That is a road that was built there, and they built it in 146 BC. This Via Ignatia they built in 146 BC. The Romans conquered the Greeks in 42 BC. Remember I told you they've been conquered numerous times. So they conquered the Greeks in 42 BC, and they started building this Via Ignatia. So many parts, including this part that I'm actually standing on, has been there since 42 BC. Parts of it. I don't know about this particular part. But so very old. It's been there. Now, this Via Ignatia still goes for hundreds and hundreds of miles. We were on a highway where the bus was. And so the bus pulled over, and we were able to pile out. And this is that same Via Ignatia. But this is where we can see, and it runs pretty much parallel to the new highway. So this was like a scenic spot like we have in Maine. There's a place for a bus to pull out that we couldn't stay there too long because other tour buses come. And we basically got out, took a picture of the Via Ignatia, and then on we went. And we could have stopped numerous times. There were a few times on the bus that we could see this road. Every now and then the guide would point it out. But yep.
It goes from all the way through all those countries, Turkey, into Israel.
Yeah, we know it, you may know it as the Romans Road. And it goes from Rome to Jerusalem, and it goes all the way to Constantinople. So yes, it connects all those. And that was because there was a because there was a road, that's part of why this was part of God's plan, because now the gospel could be spread. Notice that the road was built in 42 BC, so the gospel was being spread. Paul was there in a little past 42 AD, so that right there is 84 years and into the 50s. So about 100 years before the gospel was ready to be spread, the Romans had built this road. And now the gospel could be spread because they could go to these different places very, very quickly, and it encouraged travel. So it wasn't just the disciples that went on the Via Ignatia, but it was also other Christians spreading the gospel. Understand there was more than just the 12 of them, or much more people than you read about in the Bible. There are many people that spread the gospel, and they were able to spread the gospel because they could travel much, much faster on these roads. This is basically an overview of Philippi. So a lot of these cities, and especially in Greece, it was a little bit different in Israel. Cities are laid out in a basic format. Now, Israel is a little bit different than Philippi, no matter what you're talking about, which would be a little bit different than Rome. Just to give you, I don't want to get too far on a rabbit trail here, but just to give you, for instance, so this is the theater. The Greek theaters were written in half circles, whereas Roman theaters were full circles. And so that's one of the ways that they can tell the ruins that they're looking at, is it Greek or is it Roman? Then that helps them date when it is. And so I'll show you a better picture of this. But basically, this is Philippi. You'd come in, this is the theater. And what the theater was used for back then, I know you know this, but just to kind of bring it to your forefront of your head. Obviously, there was no internet, there was no newspapers, there was no nothing like that. When a country conquered this area, so if the Romans conquered this area in Greece, what they would do is they would send whoever the ambassador is or the regent that they would send from Rome representing the king or the emperor from Rome didn't go to all these far-flung places. And so they had emissaries that would go. And what they would do is they would gather all the people of Philippi and the region in here, and he'd say, okay, here's the new rules. Now you're under Rome, here's what you're going to do. You're going to pay us this much taxes, we're going to come and collect it twice a year, blah, blah, blah. Whenever there's a new law or a new rule, they would have you come to the theater and kind of spell it out so everybody hears it. If you don't come and hear what the rule is, then you don't comply with it. Sorry, we gave you an opportunity. If you didn't come out of your fields to hear the rule, I don't care. You still owe us that amount of money. Now you don't comply, we go to jail, whatever. So that was the theater. You follow the theater down, and then down here, and we're going to see all these things in closer up pictures. This complex down here is the prison, is the jail. All cities, at least in Greece, not so well developed in Israel, but in Greece and in Rome, what they did is they had what they call an agora, which is a marketplace. So this is the official place for giving out news, but the marketplace is where you got a lot more news. And so you had your prison here, and then the marketplace was right here. And then this was kind of like, and again, I'll show you pictures close up. This is kind of like people could gather in here to hear the court cases. So here's the prison, and if a person would come out of the prison, they would just have to go down here, and then there's a wall, you can't quite see it, and a lot of it is broken down, but we saw remnants of it. And then this is where the district court would be, and the people would hear the judgment and stuff here. Now, because this is an agora, which means marketplace, all these things over here where they would have the supplies. So like you'd have a marketplace and you have fresh fruits and vegetables. Well, when they came in along the Via Ignatia from the farms, they would fill up these little storehouses, and then during the market they would take the food and produce and chickens or whatever from these little storehouses. They'd bring it down to the market and sell it. Then when they closed up for the night, they would all go back to these little cubby holes. And if you remember the Bible, there's a part that says, and I preached on it, I don't know, it might have been a year back. We piped unto you and you did not join. We sang to you and you didn't join in. That story that's told in the Bible. And what it talks about is at nighttime when the market is closed up, this becomes a park. And it's where children play and run around in the park. So during the daytime, there's business going on, but then they close up their shops and it becomes a park for the kids to play. And so that was there, and then a series of like marketplace type stuff. Okay, so sure, you probably can't read that, so I'm going to read this to you. So this was a plaque. I took a picture of a plaque that was there. So everywhere, almost everywhere we went, they had these plaques that explain things. And most of it is not just, as you can see right there, where that box is, everything above that box is stuff that happened. This is not a Christian plaque. This is a historical plaque of Philippi. And Philippi was long before Paul ever got there. So that beginning part tells the history of it, and then the latter part tells you. Some of these plaques went right up to modern times, but I'm not so much concerned about that for now. And so I'm going to read to you what it says in that plaque. It says, however, another important event was to change the personality of the city once again. The visit of St. Paul the Apostle, who founded the first Christian church on European soil here in AD 49 to 50. So it was here at this location in Philippi, the first church on European soil in 49 and 50. And when they say 49 and 50, that would go from whatever, September or October into February or March. And so that's why they give that /4950. The predomination of the new religion and the transfer of the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople lent Philippi considerable luster and reputation. So if you remembered that map, Philippi is on the Romans' road between Rome and Constantinople. And so that's why it was a major crossroad. Excellent place to put a church. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up in the scripture reading, verse 12, Acts chapter 16, and now verse 12. From there, we traveled to Philippi. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. And we stayed there several days. So Paul, Luke, Silas, and Timothy came there and preached the gospel for several days because it was a leading city of the district of Macedonia. Again, because it's right on that Romans road. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river. So this would be probably not this exact gate, but it would be a gate like this. So the gates back in those days, they started getting away from this a little before this time, but many of the older cities still have gates, because what they used to do is they used to be roving bands of marauders that would come and rob and steal and hurt people. And so a lot of times what they did is they closed the gates of the city at night. So nobody could come in at night. They guarded them, they closed them. And so many of the cities had a city gate. And even though there were people that lived outside the gate, they all lived fairly close. So if they needed to run to the city for protection, they could run inside the gate. So they went outside the gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. And so they went to this place in Philippi, and that's where they gathered. On one of those listening, was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira. If you remember, Thyatira is one of the seven churches of Revelation, and when I had pointed out the map, we saw some of the other churches of Revelation. That's where Thyatira is. So she came over and was living in Philippi. And she was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. So that's verse 14. So this is the brook. And then what it goes on to say, when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us into her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay in my house. And she persuaded us. So she was baptized here. Now, this is a brook. Now, we obviously don't know where she was baptized, but it would have been in this area. And so I did a little recording there. I was one of three pastors. I find this a funny story. Maybe you guys won't get it. I don't know. But so I was one of three pastors, and I never knew there was an official pastor. And he and I got to talking when he found out I was a pastor. He said, would you preach now and then? You know, will you give? We did little devotionals three times a day. And so I said, yeah, just let me know. So I was always ready on which cities we were going to go in, so I knew what I was going to say, but I never knew when he was going to call on me. And so sure enough, here he called on me. And I didn't think of this till afterwards, but this is where Lydia was baptized. She was the first person in Europe to be baptized as a Christian. Lydia was the first person in Europe baptized as a Christian. Now, when I went to Israel, we went to the Jordan River. I was expecting that because that guide had asked me as a pastor, would you be willing to baptize people? And I said, sure, no problem. And so I baptized Robin, which was very special and meaning to me. And I baptized other people, and we went down and we did the immersion thing and all that. Well, I'm Baptist. I totally believe in baptism by immersion. Understand that some people don't. Some people that are Presbyterians or Methodists, they do sprinkling. And so I didn't think of it until afterwards, but then I thought, what if somebody had asked me to baptize them here? Because this is special. Lydia, the first person baptized in Europe. And what if somebody had asked me to baptize? Now, I know you can't tell from where you're sitting, but this isn't even up to my knees. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I'm a Baptist. I believe in immersion. I can't immerse anybody in this. It's only up to my knees, you know. I wouldn't have known what to do. At that point, I probably would have thought, we got a Presbyterian here. How about if he baptizes you? Because he just needs to sprinkle. You don't have to get down in there. So I don't know. And as a matter of fact, I don't know that situation will ever come up again. But I meet with groups of pastors, and that's a question that I would have to ask them. Do you go away from your Baptist roots and say, okay, I'll pour some water? I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. But anyway, so Lydia was baptized there.
It could have been deeper back then, too.
Well, back then, yeah. I'm not saying now. I'm just saying I didn't know and it could have been a different stretch of the river where it was deeper. So, so Lydia, so what Robin wants me to tell not yet. I'll get there. Okay. So here, this is that picture that I originally showed you of the theater. Now, this up here, this is a hill behind the theater, and this is called an acropolis. So in Greece, they call these acropolis. Polis means city. Acropo means the top part or a high part. So acropolis just means the highest part of the city. And so they actually had a fort up here, which we didn't visit, and you can't really see. Different places you could kind of see parts of the wall up there, but not here. And that was the Acropolis, and that's where they built a fort. So you were up above the plains, you could still shoot down from there, you could still see people coming, but it was not, the walls of Philippi were not inside there. But anyway, so this was the theater. Now, if you can tell where you are, notice that from here down, these stones are a little bit different than from here up. There's a second and then a third generation stones, and that's when they were rebuilt. So these particular stones down here were original when Paul was there back in 50 AD. And then different earthquakes, a lot of earthquakes in this area, so they would tumble down and they would eventually rebuild the upper reaches. But these were all original stones, so Paul or some of the disciples, or certainly people who were hearing him preach, would have sat their little butts right on those rocks. So that was a real thing. Similar to Israel, what the guides told us in Greece is there's three things. There are some places that they know for a fact is there, and that this would be that. They know for a fact, archaeologically speaking, that these stones were there in the time of Paul. They know that. The second thing is, when I showed you that picture of Lydia, they don't know where that is, where she actually got baptized. Those two things they don't know. And then the third thing is, sometimes they don't know, but they tell you they do. Oh, this for sure is where such and such happened. We went to Patmos, and there was a little indention on the rock, and I kid you not. The guide told us, this is where John kneeled down to pray, and then when he put his hand up on the rock to help himself get up, this is where his hand went. And it's like, nobody bought that. Okay, I'll accept that this is the cave he lived in, but that was where he put his hand when he stood up. We didn't buy that. But anyway, so those were definitely originals. Now, they could also tell this with this group of people up, and I'm going to show you a closer up picture of it, but where this group of people up here that's the jail where Paul was kept. And they have a high certainty of that because when I show you a picture out looking, or if you remember the picture that I showed you more from a distance, because of its proximity to what's down here, they said that's where he would have been, from all records indicate, he was the major rabble-rouser of that time. So they would have given him the closest prison cell to where the court is going to meet. And so that's up there. And then he would be led down here. And then there are seats, I'll show you in a minute, down here where they would actually judge. And so they would have kind of like a stone fence in between. So if the people didn't like the judgment, they couldn't get to the people who sat on the judgment seats, passing judgment. The people of the city couldn't get to the judges, throttle them or whatever. And so what they showed us, this is an example of many times, because a lot of people ask, how do you know certain things? And so what they do is they've got this symbol, and this is a big round circle with a line going through there. And what that symbolizes is this round thing is a shield, and the line that goes through it is a spear. And they said that's the symbol of, if you can picture a Masonic temple nowadays, it's got the whatever like instruments that go across, and you just see that symbol if you're familiar with it, and you know that's a Masonic temple just by seeing the symbol. So this symbol shows that's where judgment was carried out. Anytime you saw a shield with a spear, you knew that's where judgment was. So that's how we knew that that was there. And then this is, again, the picture of the shield, the jail, and they said this is a high likelihood that this was actually the actual prison where Paul was. And you can see that he could write. They had stones, for him to sleep on or sit on, and he could actually write the scrolls there. The letters that he would send to other churches. So that's the prison where he was. Okay, we're going to leave off right there now because it's almost 12 o'clock, and then we will pick up with Thessalonica. So that is where we started, then Philippi, and I'll just show you where Thessalonica is, right there. So that's where we're going next time. All right? Anybody have any questions? Next Sunday. Next Sunday. No, because we haven't got there yet.